Hello there, my name's Evelyn, and today we'll be talking about Dead by Daylight. With every game, there are issues. Nothing is perfect. Everyone who's played Dead by Daylight for a while knows that there's been numerous bugs that have essentially broken the game. If you're familiar with behavior, then you're probably aware that their way of going about things isn't as most people would. In particular, I'd like to talk about behavior seeing game balancing issues, and instead of fixing them by reviewing the issue and fixing it throughout the base game, they seem to simply slap a perk onto the issue and call it fixed. This isn't good for two reasons. First off, it can lead to the game becoming much more stale. Don't want to deal with this big issue in the game? Just use X perk. This makes it so unless you want to deal with the problem, you have to sacrifice a perk slot. This can then lead to the game becoming boring, especially for survivors, because the way you play as a survivor is defined by your perks. Secondly, this can easily turn off new players who don't have access to these perks, which can then turn them off from the game because of these issues. That's simply bad practice. Now, I'll be focusing on a select few perks that attempt to fix game issues. Here they are. Now, to clarify, I'm not saying these perks shouldn't exist. I think most of them have their place in the game as perks and not based in it, especially Undying. But when you consider the fact that playing without these perks, you're putting yourself at a huge disadvantage, except for Kindred and Survive with Friends, but we'll get to that. It's obvious that these perks are simply a band-aid for glaring game issues, which as I've already said, is bad for game health. Alright, now let's get started. What's the issue that Hex Undying tries to fix? Undying is a meh attempt to cover for the fact that on a lot of maps, totem spawns are really bad and not very well hidden, causing them to get cleansed, meaning you don't get as much use out of them as you should. Undying quote-unquote fixes this by giving your totem an extra life at the cost of another perk slot. This perk is completely fine as it is, however, because of the fact totem spawns can simply be terrible, killers almost always use Undying if they're using a hex perk, because they don't want to risk their hex getting cleansed within the first 30 seconds of the game. The fact that you can even spawn as a survivor and see a lit totem right next to you just goes to show how glaring of an issue this is. Our second game issue is attempted to be fixed by multiple perks, but we'll go over the perk that exists specifically to counter generator speed. Ruin and Corrupt may delay the game and therefore generators, but have other uses. Ruin forces survivors to cleanse a totem, and Corrupt forces the survivors to come to you, which is great for the killer and gets the game going ASAP. However, Goes The Weasel specifically exists to counter generator speeds. It's a well-known issue and has been the topic of many memes, how stupidly fast survivors can complete generators, so to counter this, behavior while releasing the count came from Pop, which is a commonly used meta perk. There's a reason that the strongest thing a killer can bring is Nurse with 4 slowdowns. This is incredibly boring for both sides anyways, and I believe the strongest choice of perks should not be for the same thing. Variety is what makes this game fun. Now, for Survivor perks. The biggest issue while playing Survivor that behavior simply seems to ignore is how terrible solo queue can be. And I'm not talking about brain-dead teammates that let you die on hook or never heal despite you crouching up and down while thanatophobia is active. I'm talking about the lack of communication. Kindred is an incredibly good perk for this, which lets survivors know who can rescue the person on hook, and also if the killer is camping the survivor. Normally, if you're playing with friends, your hooked friend can just say, "Hey, killer is camping," or your other friend can say, "Hey, I'm going for the save." However, if you're playing solo queue, you don't have this luxury, and therefore can't identify who will save a little Dwight on hook, which can waste your time as a survivor, or lead to the Dwight getting onto the second hook state, unless you bring the game-changing Kindred. You shouldn't be required to bring a perk to fix this giant issue with the game. I've always thought that solo queue should be brought as close as it can be to the level of power Survive with Friends does, as without doing so, behavior is essentially balancing two different games as one, and this would be a great way to bring solo queue closer. Lastly, we have Decisive Strike. The obvious issue that this perk attempts to fix is tunneling. Getting tunneled can make a fun game for Survivor completely boring. It's incredibly uninteresting to get hooked, get hit immediately after being unhooked, get hooked again, and then repeat that until you die. I am by no means saying Decisive should be base kit, but tunneling is a glaring issue with this game, with only one way to counter it, that being equipping perks like DS or Borrowed Time. It can be frustrating too, because the killer may simply not tunnel, and then you've just completely wasted a perk slot. I think tunneling should simply be incredibly discouraged in some way in the game. Maybe through significant blood point loss or something like that. It's a touchy subject, but having perks to fix it just feels tacked on. It doesn't fully fix the issue. Alright, well, that'll be all for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to like or subscribe. Have a great day.